7. Facets of Buddhist wisdom for daily decisions. The Buddha once listed the two qualities that he looked for in a student. One was that you be observant, and the other that you be truthful. And you see why he looked for these qualities when you look at the way he defines discernment. There's a sutta where he talks about 7 facets of discernment. And they're not just a matter of memorizing the Dhamma or being able to explain it. There's a lot more to being a discerning person, although the first quality the Buddha does mention is that you have a sense of the Dhamma. In other words, you know what the Buddha taught. That gives you a good fund of ideas to draw from. It's good to have that kind of knowledge in reserve because we have so much other garbage sloshing around in our heads. Weird ideas we picked up from who knows where. The media try to make us feel that we lack whatever they're trying to sell. They teach us values that are not really in our own best interest. So it's good to have a fund of knowledge and values that really does take your own best interest to heart and shows you what it is. Seven facets of discernment. So having a sense of the Dhamma is the beginning of discernment. You listen to it, you think about it, but then you have to develop it. And that's where the books don't give you that much help. They point you to what you've got to learn, to the fact that you've got to be observant, but they can't make you observant. That's something you've got to do yourself. The next quality the Buddha listed is that you have a sense of the meaning of the Dhamma. Meaning, here, is not just the ability to translate the Dhamma into other words. You also have to know what it's for, what it's aimed at. There are teachings that encourage you to let go. There are teachings that encourage you to develop. There are teachings that encourage contentment. There are teachings that encourage desire. So you have to figure out which is the right time for which particular teaching. You hear so much emphasis placed on being alert to the present moment. And the Buddha does teach that in some places, but that's not the whole of the teaching. You also have to think about the long-term consequences of your actions, and you have to think about lessons you've learned from the past. So even though, as we meditate, we're trying to stay focused on the breath in the present moment, we're also thinking about why we're doing this, what will be for our benefit now and into the future, and of lessons we've learned from the past. If something comes up in the present moment, you don't just sit there with whatever comes. You figure out, based on what you've learned from the past, what should be done with it. Is it a skillful quality that you can simply allow to grow on its own, or is it something you have to encourage? The same with unskillful qualities. Some of them will go away when you look at them. It's like turning the light of the sun on a little bit of water and it evaporates. In other cases, the water is so plentiful that it's not going to evaporate at all. You can just look at it, but it's not going to go away. It requires that you exert an effort. So you have to learn how to figure out which teaching applies to which situation. You have to figure out what the teachings are for. This means that you're not just reading the text. You're also reading the situation. You're reading yourself. You're reading the people around you. And that requires that you be observant. That's why the Buddha was looking for that quality in his students. You see this especially in the remaining factors of the list, beginning with having a sense of yourself. In other words, what are your strengths right now? What are your weaknesses? What needs work? What can you depend on within yourself to do that work? You have to remember that no matter how bad the situation, you've got some strengths. Have a good sense of what they are so that you can draw on them. There will sometimes be self-destructive thoughts coming into the mind. Sometimes they take over, and you look at yourself and you don't see anything good at all. You have to realize you can't believe those thoughts. They may be right to some extent, but it's not the case that you're totally hopeless. The fact that you're a human being means you have some strengths. If you're observant enough, you can find those strengths and draw on them. So have a sense of what your strengths are and where your weaknesses are so that you can figure out what needs to be done and how you can do it in your own particular case. That helps you to figure out which teaching applies to which situation for you. Another facet of discernment is having a sense of the right time. When is the time to ask questions? When is the time to figure out things on your own? When is the time to listen? When is the time to go off and just work on the problem yourself? This is something you have to observe. There's no book that tells you the basic rules. The next quality is having a sense of enough. How much is enough meditation? How much is enough reading? How much is enough food? How much is enough sleep? These are things you have to observe on your own. You try things out and see what works. Another quality is knowing how to talk to different groups of people. Back in the time of the Buddha, they had very clearly delineated castes. When you talked to Brahmins, you talked in one way. When you talked to noble warriors, you talked in another way. Nowadays, our castes and classes are not quite so clearly delineated, but you should still have a sense of the people you're with and what kind of conversation is appropriate. And finally, there's having a sense of individuals. In other words, what kind of individuals are worth emulating? Because with a lot of these qualities, such as having a sense of yourself, a sense of the right time, a sense of enough, you can learn a lot if you associate with the right people. When they approach a problem, how do they approach it? How do they stick with the practice without getting all tense and tied up in knots about it? These are important lessons you can learn from being around people who have some experience on the path. But you have to know who to look for and also who to avoid. This is especially true now that we have the internet invading our homes and our minds. It was bad enough with TV. Now the internet is with us all the time. Everywhere you go, people are glued to their screens. But they're not just screens, there are people sending messages through those screens. You have to figure out, who do you listen to? Who do you not listen to? Which links do you click on and which ones do you not? There are values being imparted, and you want to make sure that you don't pick up all the wrong values, and that you learn how to detect the biased ones. They're a little bit behind the scenes. So all this requires that you be very observant and also very truthful about what you observe. Because it is possible to notice things, but if you're not quite honest with yourself about what you're looking for, you miss a lot. They'll be there right in front of you. You detect them, but they don't register. You've got to be very clear about what your goals are and be true to your best possible goals. So of all these facets of discernment, one is just having a good body of Dhamma knowledge, and the rest have to do with watching things yourself, noticing things yourself. This is one of the reasons why, in the old days in the forest tradition, they didn't explain things very much, even simple things like how you clean up a place. I've told you many times that with Ajahn Fuang, as I was becoming his attendant, he never told me where things went or what things should be done. He told me what they shouldn't be, sometimes, especially if I'd done it wrong. So I'd have to guess, what's the right way to do this? What's the right way to do that? I'd try to notice when he put things in order. Where did he place them? He acted this way to encourage my powers of observation and also to encourage a willingness to make a mistake and learn from it rather than expect everything to be handed to me. Because when you're sitting here meditating, there's nobody here to hand you advice. There's nobody in your ear telling you to do this, to do that. You've got to figure it out on your own. As we go through life, there's no prompter. The problem is that we have these random voices going through our heads and we take them as prompters, but we have to be very careful about what we listen to. Aging comes, illness comes, death comes. You have to figure out how to handle these things. We have some guidance that comes from the past, from other people's words, but a lot of it has to come from our own powers of observation. What you do with your mind right now. What skills can you learn about how to keep your mind focused, how to keep it observant, where to focus it, so that when aging comes, you don't focus on the things that deplete your strength, so that when illness comes, you don't focus on the things that make the mind upset. The same with death. There are ways to focus the mind even as the body is dying so the mind doesn't have to suffer. We're told some of these skills as we read about how to meditate, but we have to learn the rest of them from observing our own minds as they relate to the breath, as they relate to distraction, as they relate to greed, aversion, delusion. We have to learn these lessons by being observant. When you've learned something, figure out what's the right time to apply it, because sometimes you can learn a lesson that will be good for some situations and not for others. We develop our powers of concentration, our powers of mindfulness, our powers of discernment so that we can pick up the lessons that are here for us to learn. There's a lot to observe right here in the present moment. There's a lot to observe as you deal with issues coming in from the past, planning for the future. As the Forest of Johns like to say, there's Dhamma all around. It's simply a matter of learning to read it even if it's not in books. And as with learning any language, a lot of it depends on your own powers of observation. You can live surrounded by inconstancy, stress, and not self, but not suffer from it. There are some places in the Pali Canon where the Buddha says that the 5 aggregates are stressful, and others where he says the 5 clinging aggregates are stressful. It's important to notice here that he's talking about 2 different kinds of stress. The sense in which the 5 aggregates are stressful is related to stress in terms of the 3 characteristics. They're inconstant and so they're stressful. That's simply the way they are, whether you hold on to them or not. But if you don't grab onto these things, your mind doesn't suffer. It's when you grab on, it's when you cling, that stress comes into the mind. You create a clinging aggregate. You create a connection. This is stress in terms of the 4 noble truths. Wherever there's craving, there can be clinging, and the clinging to the aggregates is the stress that really weighs on the mind. When we practice, our main focus is on the stress in the 4 noble truths, the stress that weighs on the mind. If you don't cling to the things that are stressful, then they can be as stressful as they want, but the stress doesn't come in and weigh you down. It's like picking up a heavy object. If you just leave it there on the ground, it doesn't weigh you down. It weighs the same whether you're picking it up or not. When you pick it up, it's 50 pounds. When you leave it on the ground, it's 50 pounds. The difference is that the 50 pounds is suddenly on top of you when you pick it up, and that's when you suffer. That's precisely the stress the Buddha is focusing on. That's the important one to notice. Always try to be clear about this distinction. The real problem isn't the aggregates, it's the clinging. And the word clinging has a double meaning. It can also mean the act of feeding on something. Where we cling is where we look to feed for happiness. We look to the 5 aggregates for food. We munch them down and then they munch us down. We feed on the form of the body. We feed on feelings, perceptions, thought constructs, and sensory consciousness. When these things are pleasant, they're not too heavy, but they can turn around and turn unpleasant very quickly. They gobble us up, for we've opened the way for them to get to us. Once you start clinging to the good ones, you start clinging to the bad ones as well, because that's where you're looking for food. So it's important to understand clinging so that you can put an end to it. As the Buddha said, there are 4 kinds. There's sensual clinging, clinging to views, clinging to habits and practices, and then clinging to doctrines of the self. All of these hover around the 5 aggregates. They're different ways of clinging to the 5 aggregates, and the Buddha has a different cure for each. Sometimes you hear that the deepest, most underlying form of clinging is the sense of self-identity that you build around things. If you learn how not to have any sense of self-identity, there you are. You've taken care of all the other forms of clinging. Sometimes you hear that clinging to views is the basic form of clinging. If you can deconstruct all your views, you'll be done with all the other forms of clinging as well. So you reason your way to seeing how you can't say that things exist. You can't say that things don't exist, or both, or neither. They're empty. That means that your sensual desire is empty, your habits and practices are empty, your doctrines of the self are empty. With everything empty like that, there's nothing to cling to. But that doesn't work either. After letting things go in this way, you'll find that your sensual desires weren't touched. You just turn around and pick them back up. So you have to realize that each kind of clinging has its own antidote. For example, clinging to sensuality. When the Buddha talks about sensuality, he doesn't say that you're attached to sights or sounds. The word kama, or sensuality, here doesn't mean beautiful or desirable sights, sounds, smells, tastes, or tactile sensations. It means the plans and intentions you have around these things. That's what we're really focused on. We're all attached to the ideas we have of the things we want, wanting them to be a certain way to give us pleasure. In other words, we're more attached to our dreams and plans about sensual pleasures than we are to the sensual pleasures themselves. This is simple enough to see. If you find your sensual desire thwarted in one area, you turn around and you focus it on something else. The desire is what we cling to. We cling to the plans that we make for sensual pleasure. And what are these plans like? For the most part, they're pretty one-sided and sketchy. Say you have designs on somebody else's body. When you think about that person's body, there are only certain details that you think about. A lot of details you don't want to think about at all. Or when you think about a particular relationship, you think about only certain aspects of the relationship and not about others. So the antidote here is to broaden your view, to see that your pursuit of pleasure in this way carries a lot of pain along with it. When the Buddha talks about the drawbacks of sensuality, he starts with the fact that in order to lead a sensual lifestyle, you've got to work. The work in and of itself is painful and wearisome. You work and work and work to build up wealth. Sometimes you gain it, sometimes you don't. Even when you do gain it, there's the fear that, as he says, thieves and kings will steal it. I like the way the Buddha always mentions kings and thieves in the same breath. Water might wash it away, fire might burn it, hateful airs could take off with it. That can easily happen to your wealth. And as the Buddha points out, it's over sensuality that people fight. Parents fight with their children. Children fight with their parents. Brothers with sisters. Sisters with brothers. Husband with wife. Wife with husband. And not just in the family. There are wars over sensual pleasures as well because we need to take wealth to pay for our passions, which are far greater than all the wealth in the world. That's how we end up going to war. The Buddha goes down a long list of all the pains and sufferings tied up with this pursuit of our dreams of sensuality. So as you look at the pursuit of sensuality in its entirety, you realize how much pain and suffering it involves. You don't have to look too far. This contemplation we have of the requisites every day, thinking about food, clothing, shelter, and medicine. Just the fact that we have a body makes us a burden on other people. So think about that. Every time your mind starts spinning a web of sensual desire, tell yourself, if you're going to spin a web, spin the full web. Try to encompass the whole picture. Like that daydream that a John Lee reports in his autobiography, from the time he was planning to disrobe. At first, it starts out really nice. He even gets a nobleman's daughter for his wife. But then the reality principle starts kicking in. Eventually, because she's a nobleman's daughter, she's not up to the hard work that's required in marrying a peasant's son. She dies and leaves him with a child to raise. He gets a second wife. The second wife has a kid of her own and starts playing favorites, abusing the first kid. And so on down the line. When we bring in reality like this, it helps cut through a lot of our delusions around sensuality, a lot of our attachment to sensual designs, sensual plans, sensual dreams. Or you can contemplate the body in all its parts. You can think of a beautiful body, but when you think of the parts inside, you say, woo. Just a few micrometers below the skin, there's all this other stuff, and it's inextricably connected with the things you like. Suppose you lust for somebody. You don't like the idea of their intestines, but if you took their intestines out, would you like that person without any intestines? It's not worth taking either way, with or without a liver, with or without a stomach. So when you think in these ways, you begin to realize that your sensual plans and desires are really unrealistic, really misleading. They make you half blind so that they can take you down a path to suffering. Realizing this helps cut through the sensuality. You see how arbitrary all these dreams are, that you can't rely on them. That's what helps you let them go. As for clinging to views, the Buddha has you follow a similar process, but with different details. The process is that he has you look at the drawbacks that come from clinging to a view, one of the major drawbacks being that you inevitably get into arguments with other people. But more than that, the Buddha has you look carefully at the things you have views about. This is where the details differ and the analysis goes into more technical terms. Your views come down to the question of what exists and what doesn't exist, he says. But when you actually look at your sensory experience, you just see things arising and passing away. As you focus on the arising, the idea of non-existence doesn't occur to you. As you focus on the passing away, the idea of existence doesn't occur to you. You realize that the basic building blocks of experience, when you look at them just on the level of arising and passing away, don't provide a foundation for the very basic polarities of existing and not existing. On top of that, any views you build are sketches based on not looking at things very carefully. So the Buddha has you look very carefully at the process of what it's like to experience things. When you see that views really can't express the truth about things, and that holding on to them is going to cause you to suffer, you can cut through your attachment to them. As for habits and practices, he first has you look at the actual habits or precepts and practices you're attached to. The attachment here is to the idea that if you follow certain rules and you're a good little boy, a good little girl, that's all you have to do. God will be happy with you, or the universe will approve of you, or whatever. So the Buddha has people look directly at their habits and practices together with their results, some of which are actively harmful. Back in his days, sacrifices were believed to be a way to find true happiness. So he talked about looking at the misery that comes through the sacrifices, not only for the animals sacrificed, but also for the people forced to labor in getting the animals killed. Self-torture as a form of austerity was also a popular practice in some circles. So he had you look at the pain that comes from it, to see that it doesn't really lead anywhere. It doesn't really help cleanse the mind. So in this way, he'd get people to abandon harmful habits and practices and replace them with good habits and good practices. The habits we adopt as part of our virtue, the practices we follow in the practice of meditation. But eventually, he says to watch out. If you're not careful, you're going to create a sense of conceit around these things. The pride that comes sometimes when I follow the precepts and you don't, or my jhana's better than yours. The way to get beyond that attachment is not to break the precepts or drop your practice of jhana. It's simply to continue with those practices while learning how not to develop a sense of conceit around them. Realize that you're doing these things not to make yourself better than other people, but simply because they work in cleansing the mind. Finally, there's clinging to doctrines of self. This doesn't mean just the view that I have a self, whatever your sense of self might be. It also means clinging to the view that I have no self. Thinking in either way, the Buddha said, leads you into a thicket of views that will get you entangled. So, as with the cure for clinging to views, the Buddha has you take the polarity of existence or non-existence and put it aside. When the issue of existing or not existing is a non-issue, the idea of a self-existing or not existing is a non-issue as well. Instead, the Buddha has you look at things simply in terms of the Four Noble Truths. Where is stress arising? What is the cause of that stress? What's the path to the end of that stress? As you divide up your experience in those terms, the whole issue of who you are or who you're not just gets put aside. You're more focused on what you're doing that's causing stress, learning how to comprehend the stress, learning how to abandon the cause through developing the path, so that ultimately you can realize the end of stress, the end of suffering. That's the way out of that type of clinging. So when you find the mind clinging, weighing itself down with its attachment to the aggregates, try to be clear about exactly which kind of clinging you're suffering from and what the antidote is, what the medicine that the Buddha prescribed, because it's different in each case. There's no one blanket cure to cover every form of clinging. You've got to develop your discernment from many angles, develop discernment with many facets. Essentially, every approach involves seeing things in terms of being inconstant, stressful, and not self. But those principles get applied in different ways for each type of clinging. So try to keep this list of medicines in mind and apply them as appropriate. That way, you put yourself in a position where you're living in a world that's stressful, but you're not pulling the stress inside. You can live surrounded by inconstancy, stress, and not self, but not suffer from it.